Hello and welcome to Understanding Depression, the podcast where we talk openly, honestly, and compassionately about mental health. I'm really glad you're here today, because today's episode dives into something many people wonder about. Can depression run in the family? Maybe you've noticed a pattern. Maybe your parent struggled with depression, or a sibling, or even multiple generations. And now, you're left wondering, am I next? It's a heavy thought, and it's completely understandable to feel a little anxious about it. But let's take a breath. We're not here to scare anyone. We're here to explore, to understand, and most importantly, to empower. In this episode, we're going to unpack what it really means when we talk about a family history of depression. We'll look at the role of genetics, the influence of the environment we grow up in, and the interaction between our biology and our experiences. We'll explore what research says, what it doesn't say, and how we can use this knowledge not to feel trapped, but to feel informed. Because no matter what your family background is, depression is not your destiny. There's always space for healing, change, and resilience. So whether you're listening for yourself, or someone you care about, or maybe just out of curiosity, thank you for being here. Let's work through this together. Stay with me, and let's start from the very beginning. When we talk about family history in a medical or psychological context, we're referring to patterns of health conditions that appear in blood relatives. This can include everything from heart disease to diabetes, and yes, mental health conditions like depression. But family history is not just a medical chart. It's also a story of how pain and resilience might have traveled across generations. And within that story, we often find hints about how biology and life experiences shape each other. So, let's get specific. If your parent or sibling has experienced depression, research shows that your risk may be 2 to 3 times higher than someone without a family history. That sounds serious, and it is something to be aware of. But it's not a guarantee. A family history of depression means there may be a genetic vulnerability, a kind of increased sensitivity in the brain that makes it more likely, but not inevitable, that you could also experience symptoms of depression. Think of it like a loaded gun that may or may not ever be triggered, depending on life circumstances, environment, and your coping skills. And here's something important. Depression doesn't always look the same from person to person, even within the same family. Some people feel deeply sad, others feel emotionally numb. Some lose interest in everything, others hide it behind a smile. So recognizing family history isn't just about looking for carbon copies. It's about being mindful of emotional patterns, behaviors, and the silent struggles that sometimes go unspoken for years. In many families, mental health just wasn't talked about. Maybe there was stigma. Maybe it was brushed off as just being tired, or just needing to pray harder, or just part of life. That silence can make it hard to trace what's really going on. But breaking that silence, that's part of healing. Let's go deeper. What's actually going on in the brain when depression shows up in multiple generations? Stay with me, because in the next segment, we're going to unpack the science behind genetics and mood. Let's talk science. One of the biggest questions researchers have been trying to answer for decades is depression inherited? The answer? It's complicated, but also really fascinating. First, let's clarify something important. There is no single depression gene. You won't find one specific strand of DNA that determines whether or not someone will experience depression. Instead, scientists have identified many genes, dozens, maybe hundreds, that might slightly increase a person's vulnerability to depression. Each of these genes plays a small role in things like how your brain processes serotonin, how your stress response system functions, or how your emotions are regulated. So yes, genetics matter. If depression runs in your family, it's possible that you may inherit a certain sensitivity to stress, to emotional pain, or to mood shifts. But here's the catch. Genes are not fate. And this is where environment comes in. Think of it like this. Genes may load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. Or for a gentler metaphor, your genes are the blueprint, but your life builds the house. If someone grows up in a safe, nurturing environment, with emotional support, healthy coping models, and access to mental health resources, they might never develop depression, even if they carry a genetic predisposition. But if that same person experiences trauma, chronic stress, neglect, or toxic family dynamics, their risk could increase significantly. It's not either or, it's both. Nature and nurture working together. There's even a scientific term for this: gene-environment interaction. That's when certain environmental factors, like abuse, loss, or extreme stress, activate or turn on certain genetic tendencies. And here's something powerful to remember. The environment you create for yourself now can be part of healing, even if the environment you grew up in wasn't. You're not just a product of your genes. You are also your choices, your growth, your relationships, your healing, and all of those things matter. In the next segment, we'll explore what inherited traits might look like in the brain, and how brain chemistry plays a role in depression. Stiquisme. Let's take a look inside the brain, literally. When we talk about depression and family history, one of the most researched areas is neurobiology, how the brain's chemistry, structure, and function might be affected by inherited traits. If you've ever heard the term chemical imbalance, this is where that idea comes from. While it's an oversimplification, it points to something real. People with a family history of depression may have differences in how their brain regulates mood. One of the most studied areas involves neurotransmitters, chemical messengers in the brain, specifically serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. These chemicals help regulate everything from mood to energy to motivation. In people with depression, there can be disruptions in how these chemicals are produced, transmitted, or reabsorbed. And research suggests that these disruptions can, in some cases, be genetically influenced. But it's not just about chemicals. Brain imaging studies have shown that people with a family history of depression may also have subtle differences in brain structures, like the amygdala, which processes emotion, or the prefrontal cortex, which helps with decision-making and regulating thoughts. Now, does that mean you're doomed if your brain looks different? Not at all. The brain is remarkably adaptable. It's capable of neuroplasticity, which means it can form new connections, grow new cells, and even rewire itself in response to therapy, mindfulness, physical activity, and meaningful relationships. Your brain is not a fixed machine. It's a living, changing system. And that means that even if you inherit certain traits, you can still influence how your brain works through healing experiences, healthy habits, and mental health support. It's also worth mentioning that many people with genetic risk never go on to develop clinical depression, and others who have no family history at all do experience it. Why? Because genetics are just one piece of the puzzle, and the full picture includes environment, trauma, lifestyle, emotional resilience, and so much more. So what happens when family history and environment collide? Let's talk about how childhood experiences can either protect or intensify the risk. We'll get into that next. We've talked about genes. We've talked about brain chemistry. But now, let's bring it home, literally. Because your family environment growing up can shape your mental health just as much, sometimes more, than your DNA ever could. Think about it. How your parents or caregivers responded to stress, how emotions were handled in a household, and whether love felt safe or conditional. These early experiences build the foundation of how we relate to ourselves and the world. Now, if a parent struggled with depression, it may have affected how present or emotionally available they were. Not because they didn't love you, but because depression can cloud a person's ability to connect, to regulate, to show up fully. And if that depression wasn't acknowledged or treated, it can quietly ripple into how a child learns to process their own emotions. Children are incredibly perceptive. Even if no one ever said something's wrong, kids can feel it. They notice the low energy, the distance, the unpredictability, and often, without guidance, they internalize it. Sometimes, kids in these environments grow up to become fixers, always trying to keep the peace. Others may learn to suppress their own emotions to avoid adding more tension. Still others might feel invisible or responsible for things that were never their fault. Over time, these coping mechanisms can turn into anxiety, low self-worth, or emotional numbing. And in some cases, they can contribute to the development of depression. But here's the thing. Just because you grew up with those patterns doesn't mean you have to repeat them. Awareness is a powerful first step. Understanding how your past shaped your mental health gives you the power to make different choices now. And if you're parenting today, or planning to in the future, being aware of your family's mental health patterns can help you break the cycle. You can model emotional openness. You can normalize therapy. You can teach your kids it's okay to not be okay, and it's more than okay to ask for help. The cycle doesn't have to continue. You can be the shift. Up next, let's look at a few real-life inspired examples, cases that show how depression can show up across generations, and what breaking the pattern can look like in practice. Stay with me. Let's ground all this in something real, because sometimes it's stories, not science, that help us connect the dots. Here are a few fictionalized but reality-inspired stories that reflect what so many people experience when depression runs in the family. Story 1. Michael. The unspoken legacy. Michael grew up with a father who rarely spoke about his feelings. He was hardworking but emotionally distant, prone to long periods of silence, sudden outbursts, or shutting himself in the garage for hours. Michael didn't have the language for it at the time, but now, as an adult, he suspects his dad was dealing with undiagnosed depression. Michael always thought strength meant staying quiet and pushing through. But in his late 20s, after a tough breakup and job burnout, he found himself overwhelmed, unmotivated, and withdrawn. It wasn't until a close friend gently suggested therapy that he even considered it. In therapy, Michael began to see the emotional patterns that had shaped him. He realized that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was courage. Today, he's not just healing, he's talking to his younger brother about mental health, something no one ever did for him growing up. Story 2. Amira. The caregiver's weight. Amira was the strong one in her family. Her mother had struggled with deep sadness and mood swings for as long as she could remember. As the eldest daughter, Amira became the emotional glue, translating her mom's moods, keeping things calm, and sacrificing her own needs to hold the family together. She didn't think she had the right to feel overwhelmed. Others had it worse, right? But when she started waking up exhausted, crying in the shower, and feeling like life had lost its color, she knew something was wrong. Her therapist helped her name it: depression. And more than that, emotional burnout from years of caretaking without support. For Amira, healing looked like finally choosing herself, setting boundaries, saying no, and accepting that she deserved care too. Story 3. Jordan. The unexpected inheritance. Jordan never knew much about his biological parents. He was adopted as a baby into a loving home, but in his 20s, after battling persistent low mood and anxiety, he decided to search for his birth family. That's when he learned both of his biological parents had histories of depression. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces began to fit. Jordan didn't feel doomed by this discovery. In fact, it helped him feel less alone and more motivated to invest in his mental health. He started therapy, made lifestyle changes, and joined a support group. For the first time, he felt empowered. These stories remind us, family history can shape us, but it doesn't have to define us. Healing is possible. Breaking the cycle is possible. And sometimes, knowing your story is the very thing that helps you rewrite it. Coming up next, we'll explore how to talk about family mental health history and what steps you can take if you're concerned about your own risk. Stay tuned. Okay, deep breath, because this next part isn't always easy. Talking about mental health in families can be uncomfortable, especially in households or cultures where emotional struggles were rarely named, let alone discussed. But breaking the silence is often the first real step toward healing, not just for you, but for those around you too. So where do you start? 1. Start with curiosity, not blame. If you're wondering about your family's mental health history, approach the conversation with kindness. You could say, "I've been learning more about mental health, and I was curious. Has anyone in our family ever struggled with things like depression or anxiety?" This opens the door gently. You're not accusing or diagnosing, just inviting openness. Choose your moment wisely. These conversations work best when no one feels ambushed. Pick a time when things are calm, maybe during a walk, over coffee, or in a private, relaxed setting. And be prepared. Not everyone will be ready to talk. Sometimes, it takes more than one attempt. Sometimes, you'll get silence or deflection. That's okay. Keep the tone gentle. You're planting seed. Be open about your own experience. If you're struggling with your mental health, sharing your story can help others feel safe enough to share theirs. You might say, "I've been going through a tough time lately, and therapy has been helping. It made me wonder if this kind of thing runs in our family." You'd be surprised how often someone responds with, "Actually, yeah, I felt that too." 4. Respect silence. But don't let it stop you. Not every family member will be open. Some may be in denial. Others may carry shame. That doesn't mean your questions aren't valid. It just means the healing might take time. Keep seeking knowledge. Keep building your own emotional language. Gather what you can. Even fragments help. Sometimes, you won't get the full story. Maybe relatives have passed. Maybe information is limited. But even fragments, like "I think Grandma used to stay in bed for weeks," or "Uncle Joe always seemed really down," can offer insight. This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about understanding patterns, connecting the dots, and empowering yourself to respond with awareness. And most importantly, you're not alone in asking these questions. So many of us are doing the same, trying to understand ourselves by understanding where we come from. Next, let's talk about what you can actually do if you know depression runs in your family. How to protect your mental health, build resilience, and create a life where your past informs you, but doesn't control you. Let's go there next. So, let's say you've looked into your family's history. You've noticed patterns. Maybe your parent or grandparent experienced depression. Maybe it's been unspoken, but felt. And now you're wondering, what can I actually do about it? The good news? A lot. Even if you have a genetic predisposition to depression, there are many science-backed ways to protect and support your mental health. Here's where you can start. 1. Know your early warning signs. Depression doesn't usually appear overnight. It often shows up slowly, through changes in sleep, energy, appetite, motivation, or mood. If you know your family is at higher risk, it helps to regularly check in with yourself. Ask, "Am I withdrawing from people? Have I lost interest in things I used to enjoy? Are my thoughts getting more negative or hopeless?" Early recognition means earlier support and potentially a much easier recovery process. Build emotional literacy. When depression runs in the family, sometimes emotional expression is stunted. Maybe you weren't taught how to talk about feelings. That's okay. You can learn now. Journaling, talking to a therapist, or even using simple feeling check-ins like the mood wheel can help you name and process what you're going through. The more fluency you have with your inner world, the easier it becomes to manage it. Move your body regularly. It's not just a self-help cliche. Physical activity has real mental health benefits. Exercise increases levels of serotonin and endorphins, reduces stress hormones, and even helps your brain grow new neurons. You don't have to become a gym rat. Dancing, walking, stretching, swimming, it all counts. The key is consistency, not perfection. Prioritize sleep like it's medicine. Sleep is when your brain repairs, regulates mood, and clears out toxins. And people with a genetic vulnerability to depression are especially sensitive to poor sleep patterns. Aim for a consistent sleep routine, going to bed and waking up at similar times, limiting screen time before bed, and creating a restful environment. Nourish your brain with what you eat. There's growing research on the gut-brain connection and how your diet can affect your mood. While food alone won't cure depression, eating balanced meals with plenty of fiber, omega-3s, and whole foods can support your mental health. It's not about dieting. It's about fueling your body and brain with what helps them thrive. Build meaningful relationships. Connection is a protective factor. Having even one person you can be real with, a friend, partner, therapist, mentor, can reduce your risk of depression. Isolation, on the other hand, increases it. So make it a goal to nurture relationships that feel safe, supportive, and emotionally honest. And if you don't have that yet, consider joining a support group or therapeutic community. You deserve connection. Consider therapy or preventive mental health care. You don't have to wait for things to get bad enough before seeking help. In fact, proactive therapy, just like preventive checkups for your body, can be incredibly helpful, especially if you know you're at higher risk. A therapist can help you explore your family history, process past wounds, and learn skills to manage your mental health day to day. You're not powerless. You're not destined to repeat your family's struggles. You are capable of healing and leading a life shaped by choice, not inheritance. And finally, we'll close this episode by reflecting on what it really means to honor your story, even the hard parts, and why you are never alone in this journey. If you've made it this far, thank you. This journey, unpacking family history, confronting inherited pain, and daring to hope for something different, it's not an easy one, but it's powerful, and it's brave. Because here's the truth, family history is not your fault, but healing? That's your right. Maybe depression runs in your family. Maybe silence and shame do, too. But you are the new chapter. You get to ask the questions no one asked, feel the feelings no one named, make the choices no one modeled. That is not a burden. That is a form of generational courage. And let's be clear, healing doesn't mean your life will be perfect. It means that you'll be more equipped, more aware, more connected to your needs, your boundaries, your values, more present with your own heart. It might look like saying no when your body is begging for rest, choosing therapy even when no one else in your family ever did, allowing yourself to cry, to talk, to not be strong all the time, raising your kids differently, with more emotional language and less silence, letting go of shame and choosing compassion instead. If this episode stirred something in you, please know you're not alone. There are others walking this same path. People who veut come before you. People healing beside you. People rooting for you, even if they've never met you. And if you're not sure where to start, that's okay too. Start small. Start kind. Start with a breath, a journal entry, a conversation, a call to a therapist, or even just listening to this podcast all the way through. That's already a beginning. So wherever you are in your story, just beginning in the messy middle or reclaiming peace, you belong here. You matter, and you're doing something deeply meaningful. If this episode resonated with you, Please consider subscribing, sharing it with a friend, or leaving a comment. You never know who might need this message today. And as always, stay curious, stay compassionate, and take gentle care of your mind. We'll talk again soon.